and then that be good. So, I thought I'd start off a nice global sort of one. It's like, what do you see her sort of her contribution and role in the development of the and organization of the TGFU movement as a whole sort of thing?
Well, once she called it a movement. So from the New Hampshire, that was her big thing when she came up to UBC. What always struck me about Joy is her unbelievable power to network. So she was very good at tapping people on the shoulder and saying, "Oh, would you be interested in?" Because I heard, right? And in such a way that they couldn't say no. so normally she was able to get people to volunteer that way, but also they volunteered because other people were volunteering. So she was really good at getting sort of this, in a complexity sense, an exponential group of people suddenly started feeling part of the collective. And so I think she served like the hub to pull people in.
Right.
And the other characteristic would be like she's very tenacious. So if she decides she's going to do something, she won't stop until it happens. She's very, very persistent. Sometimes some people don't like that, but they don't always get involved then, right? Other people think, you may know that feeling, that if you don't say yes, she'll keep asking you.
Right. Okay.
until you say no, but you probably won't say no to be polite, so she's got you, right? That type of, but you need someone like that to make an organization grow. So a major contribution would be a capacity to network people, and I'm thinking organizationally right now. And the other part would be she understood TGFU from a historical perspective, having grown up with it in the UK. And so when she moved from being a sort of basketball player for England and then became a teacher, she started applying these ideas and was inventing games and things like that when she started out. And so she just thought it was normal. And then when she became an academic, she started realizing that people don't do this. Why not? Right? And so I think if you say it was a movement, it was in her head, it had already happened. But then when she became an academic, she realized it hadn't. So the stuff that Morden, Redfern, and then what Bunker and Thorpe had done had resonated with people, but mainly with academics and not so much with practitioners.
Right.
So I think that would be where I would say that she became that conduit to sort of make it go global, so people saw something and recognized it. And I would say, therefore, the movement, she made the TGFU label dominant. And when I came on the scene, I realized that was good from my point of view, because I was same socialized like her for the UK, but from the play practice, the game centered, the other people who'd come up with other approaches similar to TGFU, they were pretty much, oh, this is not TGFU, it's our idea first. So there was this sort of tension because TGFU became so popular.
Right.
And when you realize, when you talk to David in Spain, they just use TGFU because it's easy to understand, right? TGFU. And they then have other approaches relate to that. They just call them TGFU. So really what I think Joy did is she made TGFU this catch-all. And because Bunker and Thorpe and Len had sort of moved out, retired, it wasn't like their reputation, whereas other people were trying to establish themselves by having a new idea, mine's play practice or purposeful play. There's all sorts of ones that were coming up. So I think what she managed to do was then allow that tension to then sort of permeate, and then people started to corral around a movement around how we teach games.
Okay. And so in that, you've also captured some of her qualities. Were there any other qualities that were sort of core to that sort of leadership that you had? You got the tenacity, networking ability.
Yeah, I mean, I put here very single-minded when she had an idea that she would push it through. So her capacity to do that was quite immense. So like we get on later for the IAB, she really pushed that through so that it was global, right? Because in her head, it had to be global to move forward. So she was very keen on the innovation. And sometimes I think she got too keen on the right way of doing it. Because I remember Rod Thorpe saying to her, well, in Hong Kong, they're going to interpret it differently to how we do it in the UK. It's the idea we're after, not follow it, the steps, because then you're not responding to kids learning and the cultural influence on that learning. So she sort of had to reframe a little bit, because I remember her trying to get everybody to do it the right way.
Right. Yeah, no, no.
And
So that's very much, yeah, Joy. It's fidelity to the model. This is, yeah.
right. And so we didn't always agree on that, because I always said, it's a curriculum model, Joy, not a lesson plan model.
Right.
And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, 35-minute lesson, you may not go game, practice, game. But in 2 lessons, you might get that cycle, which is a curriculum model, because where are the kids at? I might start off with a skill focus if, they remember from last class, we're going to pick up on that, and then we go back to the game. So, lessons aren't set times, and so learning doesn't happen in the way that enclosed in a lesson. It's a curriculum model. Right. So it's the understanding that transfers from one learning experience to the next. Okay. And that's when people critique, workshops at conferences. And I say, well, it's a workshop, it's not a lesson plan. They're trying to advocate something, but yes, they're doing it in a very direct manner because they've got limited time and they're trying to cover a lot. But yeah, they're not modeling what they're talking about. No. But what they're advocating is what they say in their practice they do. So you have to sort of, relate to what people are imagining the audience wants to hear.
So, in a sense, then that's like, that next question there, like what were her key theoretical foundations that sort of informed her work? So what you feel passionate about, but I suppose theoretically, how did it frame it up to be a particular academic?
Well, you look at her Jofa's Socrates paper, our first one that really got out there. That was the, social constructivist, the questioning approach, the inquiry into. That's where she loved, create the situation and then people play with it a little bit and then come back with answers. And so initially she was always about the social construction of it. But at the same time, led on that was a very strong women's rights, need for social justice, empathy for the other, in particular on gender, because of males tend to dominate females in many team sports in particular. But that also kicked into a sort of feminist notion that, sport should be a model for how society treats those who are oppressed or don't get opportunities. Right. And so you got that social constructivism and then this sort of social transformation agenda interacting. And then later on, especially when she went to UBC and then, worked with Brent and Dennis a lot, she really got into complexity theory. And working with you and me on the book, she started to expand on the notion of constructivism and really start realizing how context interacts with individuals' knowledge about who they are and what they're trying to do, and that context causes a self-organizational process. And so that language started coming in, the emergence of that was very different to original language, which was more about you should do this way, but you should construct it, but you should find this answer out because this is what is right. So she sort of changed a bit. That was still there in her background, but then the process by which you come to that. And then the end, the old notion of aporia was her big thing that she started getting into. And the aporia being the puzzled state that leads to an ethical understanding of what we should do next and how you create the awareness of those. So that was her sort of, create scenarios that then you unpack.
Right.
One, in constructing the game, but also realizing your social responsibility to other players. So those two things, I think, started to intertwine quite a bit.
Okay, so a lovely summary. Okay, cool. No, and that captures a really nice evolution of her thinking, doesn't it? Nice. Okay, cool. All right, then let's look at some of those things about the history of, I suppose, the SIG, and what can you remember of her role sort of initiating that 2001 conference? And
so I wasn't at the 2001, but she told me a lot about it because that was her home, right? So the New Hampshire, and she sort of organized and I think galvanized, brought in, tried to bring in Alan Launder with Len and Rod, to all the old guard, and it was trying to sort of create a renewal. And the energy from that conference was obvious because later on at La Coruna and Hong Kong, I came in on that, and people traveled to the conference because of the first conference, right? So there was basically her and she would tell you the whole group of organizers at that first one really created a platform for conversation. And the notion of people were looking for something that wasn't about elite sport and motor competency, but about the play of a game, the joy of playing a game. And, the Peter Werner stuff, we want every kid to understand the sensation of playing a worthwhile game, right? They leave class, they've had something that they find memorable. And that was what I think happened in the first in 2001. And then when I got joined in, she'd got it going as a task force. But what happened was Joy ended up doing all the work. Other people weren't intended, but they all gone back to their institutions. And there was a lack of shared responsibility. So people who were on a task force would have conversations, but weren't particularly or located in a place where they could do anything. So when I came on the scene, I had technology skills. So, if you look at 2002, 2003, I basically took over from Kevin Patton, who'd started a website, and he just set it up. He hadn't done nothing else, which is good. It was good, but he'd moved on. I mean, he was in junior faculty. He had to get, established. I took his lead and then developed that website and got the name TGIF.org and all those things, and then started a vehicle to spread.
Right.
And then after me, Kelly came. So you had to have someone who had that ability with the World Wide Web to maintain that global presence. And so that was a bit that Joy needed. And then when we started working together, then when it went to La Coruna, the energy, I think, was at New Hampshire started to come alive, because I have this memory of going to La Coruna, going to the school we're going to work at, an hour before registration. It's all dark and we can't freaking get into the gym or the school. We had to go and wake up the custodian for sleep to let us in.
Right.
And we had like 120 people turning up. And running, Stephen Harvey and myself, we're trying to build. Kathy was there. We're putting tables down. We put in Karen Richardson and people. Quick, set this up. We've got to register people here. And then it came flooding in, and it was just amazing. Like cash was just flying at us.
Wow. Yeah.
And part of it was Len Armour was there, so he became like a attraction because people had read, right? So I was in a session with Len, and it was just absolutely packed. So I was doing one on video games, and Len was doing one on the original taxonomy around, and all the practicals were really good in the gym. And it was just so natural, and there was sort of this real practitioner academic mix that was nobody could tell who was what, right? There was everybody.
That's the Coruña one, but that was attached. Was that a pre-conference thing?
Yeah, that was a part of the ASAP, right? So it was their practical side. And what Leonard said to ASAP is, we have a phys ed conference with no practical sessions.
Right.
We need to return to our roots,
right?
Which I think made the argument for why the SIG needed to happen.
Right.
And then the popularity at La Coruna, when they just saw local teachers turning up and then young academics mixing, it makes ASAP more authentic. Right? Because we're actually modeling stuff that we're researching. So that was a sort of, that conference just seemed to galvanize people, why we do TGFU.
Right.
And the fact that it resonates with practitioners at some level, even though they may not be following the total fidelity of the model, they can engage in these ideas. And if it's practical with it and it makes sense, they're really excited. And if they go away with 3 or 4 good ideas, they think it's well spent money.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because it was, it must have been a big step for ASAP to consider a SIG in a sense. I don't know if you remember any of those sort of.
Right. I think it was Mary O'Sullivan and Len were on the board, and they made the push. Or I think Len was making the push, and Mary was the other side. But they were the ones that I think in the background were advocating. So, and then Joy had created the obviously this task force, but then had a critical mass that then made ASAP think, oh, well, this is actually a good recruitment strategy as well. Right? Yeah. And so people would join this to join this, right? So that sort of came together, because I think, well, I know La Coruna, we pulled in a lot of people.
Right.
Because I just don't know I don't know why that happened, how they advertise or what, because people just turned up, lots of Spanish. I mean, I don't know. It's just like,
Well,
I mean, when
sometimes
we did,
it's, yeah, right time,
well,
right
when we
place.
did the one on UBC, we were worried right to the end if we're going to get the real critical numbers.
Yeah.
But they all turned up at the last minute. But
I think
we
the same
weren't. We
thing's
didn't.
happening up at Worcester. It's a real concern up there that they're just not going to get the numbers. They were hoping for around 200 and they've got about 100 and they're not even sure if they're going to get 50%. I don't know what their break even point is, but they're starting to panic a little wee bit.
Well, the early bird thing hasn't come up yet, so no one puts in until the deadline to the early bird. So.
Yeah, well, they keep on extending it, don't they? And they just ask if they should extend it again and, trying to push.
Well, that's the
Um,
call for papers, right? That's not the registration.
no, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the
Because
call.
I'm in already. I haven't registered yet. It's just like, God, that's
Right.
another thing in my head, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway,
Okay.
so that would be my thing. Yeah. And so then that's when I think the SIG started to form. And then once the SIG formed, that got Joy into this whole infrastructure and creating terms, the sort of, what we call it, well, you got involved in that, right? When we have what's our outline? What's the thing we call it? I've forgotten now.
The SIG or the
Terms of operation, really.
Oh, yeah, the memorandum. No, not yeah, the rules.
Yeah. So we had a beginning of that, and then you started enhancing that when you came on board, right? So people like yourself, like I had the technology, you brought in that sort of, let's get the policy sorted out here, right?
That was much later. I remember. Oh, when was that? Yeah, 2003. I remember attending a meeting, and Lynn Kidman and myself were sort of the New Zealand people there, and I think Joy or somebody had called for somebody from New Zealand to be sort of a representative, and Lynn was really keen, and I sort of magnanimously at the time sort of said, well, look, it's sort of toss of a coin, but I'm happy if you want to do something, you do it, and then let Lynn, and then kick myself afterwards because thinking after that New Zealand never heard anything else from Lynn again, And so,
well, she went to Worcester then. Did she go back to the UK?
yeah, she was at that stage. She was at Canterbury University, and then she went to AUT, and she might have gone somewhere else. But
Yeah.
I think she was very knowledgeable and what have you, but not a good networker, and in terms of that.
No.
And it always sort of hit me off. So that was quite good. It was lovely when later on, and you invited me to sort of consider and get involved, and at least then I could ramp up New Zealand's sort of contribution a little bit more. But yeah, so there's that evolution. So what was her role in the IAB? Because that was another big initiative of hers.
Well, that goes back to her networking, right? Because
Yeah.
she had connections around the world, but so that got it going. But then the realization was we needed someone who was connected to the national body. So that became the criteria, because some people, again, took it up, would attend meetings, but weren't really doing anything because they didn't know what to do. And it just became a line on their CV.
Right.
Whereas the goal would be that you are connected to your national body, and therefore you're reporting to them if there's a conference going on, if there's a ASEP and a pre-conference going on, so that that body is then promoting it in their nation, and also trying to advocate for resources and ideas around the teaching of games through TGFU, so that what initiative is happening in other countries that can get spread around. So that was then became the goal. And so Joy was really about forming that as the chair and creating the president of the SIG, becoming the past president who's then chairing the IEB. And then the IEB is encouraging people to then apply for positions on the boards. And so you sort of have a network starting to form where you've got some type of sustainability. And part of any organization is how you build in its capacity to reproduce itself. Mm. So I think that was what her goal became. However, you realized and I realized time zones and how the hell do you connect people, right? How do you get them to figure out when it's actually a whole day difference, 18 hours? I mean, what time do you meet at 2 a.m. so it's reasonable for someone else? It's very difficult to do global movements.
Well, I also think it requires, obviously energy to go into the system. You need that, what you had and what Joy had was the commitment and the energy, constant networking, pull people in, encourage, be enthusiastic, encourage them, make it important. And I don't think we've got that on the board at the moment, and I don't think, certainly I killed it off in terms of the IAB, and David's trying to put that energy back in now into the IAB. But I think along the way, what I've learned is I think you got to be really strategic about who gets onto the board, and what are they bringing. And I think it's, I think I've said that to Linda, who's chairing it at the moment, to say, the next people that come onto the board, we've got to be, they've got to commit themselves. So, we've had people that miss nearly every meeting, and that's ridiculous when they're missing every meeting.
Yeah.
And your secretary or your treasurer or they're leading a proper, a key role, but they do nothing from meeting to meeting. So we really do need some people up there who give the organization some legitimacy because of their seniority kind of in the field, but also they're deeply committed to encouraging, leading, and what have you. But okay, so we'll go on then and say, is there anything else around the IAB and TGFU becoming a SIG of ASEP?
Well, one of the things that Joy was always after, and actually David was trying to do the same thing, is how do you get not relying on English as a way of communicating ideas, right? Because it's, again, very difficult for someone in Japan who hasn't got English as a first language, or David who hasn't got English as first language, to really communicate, though these ideas are global. So that was where the whole notion of video and how to represent it through, modern day modalities that aren't reliant on one dominant language. And so Joy was pushing for that, and David had, and it's not happened yet, but it's going to happen, right? Eventually it's going to become, we can communicate, because part of what it is, and you and I talked about this in relation to complexity theory, is you're showing a game that creates the conditions for something to emerge. But the best way of showing it is, here is it not working, here's what I changed, here's it working, right? If you show a video of that, any teacher gets it. Oh shit, what's the list of things I do for that, right? So it just needs, and it's not even necessarily a good question is needed, right? I mean, I'm just trying to get my students to think about it. And really, when I ask questions, space, time, force, risk, I can use those in my head. I'm asking questions to get those 4 things in the kids' head as they play a game. Okay. Right? Yeah. It doesn't create they're always looking for the perfect question. Well, no, in the context, where do you go after you send the ball? Oh, as soon as you go there, now what do you do to create space? Okay. Right? I mean, it's a type of thing where we know we can get through, but that's why I think the IAB will grow, because to communicate, we have to get away from relying on our English colonial language. We have to share.
Okay then, last 2 questions. So in your mind, what do you think her unique contribution to the field of games, teaching games, is?
I think, I just wrote this down here. So the desire for students to learn the joy of playing a game they feel a part of, one they can co-create, they've designed in a way that makes all players feel valued and therefore want to play the game again. So the notion of when we play, and this is more like playing with your grandkids as well as playing at the highest level, right. There's a moment where you get that sense of total connectedness. And I think that's what she was always trying to get at. I mean, her writing about complexity theory is trying to get at that. And how do you create the conditions where kids of diverse abilities can create games or play in games where they mutually have joy. And even if they lose, they could have won. Right? So winning and losing is just a moment of excitement, not a devastation to them. So that's really, I think, so, in a way, joy is advocating the joy of playing a worthwhile game.
Right. Okay. No, that's well put. That's very good. Okay. So last question then, overall, what do you see as her legacy then to TGF?
I just put down here, making the name synonymous with simply good pedagogy.
Cool. Good. All right. That's very good. Excellent. Thanks, Tim. No, there's some great comments. Great.
Well, she was a great woman. She had some things that weren't great, but the things were really that she did make an impact and made a difference. So and she became a name like Len and Rod and David because of an idea that resonates.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think she was just trying to move that idea on in a very complex world where, like for Trump and the right wing agenda is pushing back against this type of mindset. So we know it's going to change, but I think we have to keep these ideas that she's advocating in mind, because we can't go down that route of exclusion and overpowering people just because you have some type of advantage.
No, that's very good.